Food storage and preservation, why it matters, and how to do it properly. Here are some of the benefits when you get good at storing food. You reduce food waste, which saves money, and is better for the environment. Fruits and vegetables will stay fresh longer. You can buy things in bulk or in season, which will save money. And you can use them over a longer period of time without rushing, which can reduce stress. You can treat yourself with fruits and veggies at all times of the year. Old-time methods of food storage can make for a fun hobby, or a creative new way to eat your fruits and veggies. You can eat well during a power outage or while camping, as many food storage techniques don't require electricity. One traditional method of food preservation, fermenting, can add beneficial microbes to your diet. 3 types of food. All food can be classified into one of 3 groups, which require different storage methods. 1. Perishable foods. These include many raw fruits and vegetables as well as, for those who eat them, meat, dairy, and eggs. All cooked foods are considered perishable foods. To store these foods for any length of time, perishable foods need to be held at refrigerator or freezer temperatures. If refrigerated, many perishable foods should be used within 3 to 7 days, less for many animal products. 2. Semi-perishable foods. Food that's semi-perishable, depending on how they're stored and handled, can go bad quickly, or can have an extended shelf life. Flour, grain products, dried fruits, and dry mixes are considered semi-perishable. If optimally stored and handled, like in a clean, vacuum-sealed bag, semi-perishable foods may remain unspoiled for 6 months to a year. Frozen, some can last even longer. 3. Staple, or non-perishable foods. Dried beans, spices, and canned goods are all non-perishable foods. They won't spoil unless they're handled carelessly. However, even if they're stored under ideal conditions, they can start to lose quality over extended periods of time. Factors that affect food storage life. For perishable and semi-perishable foods, the general rule of thumb is that if you can't use it promptly, it needs to be stored or preserved. Here are the main factors that will impact a food's shelf life during storage. The food itself, for example, strawberries can degrade in as little as a day, while potatoes can last for months when properly stored. The freshness and ripeness of the food when you obtain it. This depends in part on where it was grown and how long it's spent in transit. Even if you just bought it from a grocery store, it may have been just very recently harvested, or not. The length of time and the temperature at which it was held before you bought it. The temperature of your food storage areas, whether it's the refrigerator, freezer, countertop, pantry, or basement. The humidity level in your food storage areas, which can vary greatly depending on the location in your house and what region you live in. The type of storage container or packaging the food is stored in, such as glass, plastic, foil, or cloth. The pros and cons of 6 ways to store food. There are numerous ways to store food, each with their own benefits and downsides. Here are some things to consider, depending on which method you're using. 1. Canning. Canning can be a cost-effective way to preserve the quality of food at home. Commonly canned foods include applesauce, vegetables, jams and jellies, and baby purees. The basic steps for proper canning include thoroughly washing the fresh produce you'll be using, peeling, and hot packing if needed, adding acids like lemon juice or vinegar if the food isn't already sufficiently acidic, and using self-sealing containers with lids. Canning jars are then processed by boiling water for acidic fruits and vegetables, or using a pressure canner for low-acid fruits and vegetables for the appropriate amount of time. This helps prevent bacterial growth and kill any pathogens to ensure safety. Home canning can lead to significant financial savings, and it gives you no risk of BPA contamination, as you will use glass mason jars in place of plastic or BPA-lined commercial cans. Canned foods also keep their nutritional value longer, though some losses do occur. Approximately 30 to 50% of vitamins A, C, thiamine, and riboflavin are lost during the heating process, with an additional 5 to 20% loss of these per year. Less sensitive vitamins remain intact over time, and are found in only slightly lower amounts than in fresh food. Vegetables can be pretty hardy if handled and canned quickly, and can maintain much of their nutrition. And you don't necessarily need to do anything with canned foods before eating. You can just enjoy them right out of the container. Risks and downsides of canning. There are also some risks to consider with canning. Home canning requires a sterile environment to prevent contamination. Canned foods also need to be stored at the right temperatures, with airtight lids, to prevent pathogens like botulism. In other words, don't rely solely on the instructions in this article. Follow these USDA guidelines and pay attention to cleanliness, timing, and temperature to ensure you're preserving food, and not armies of harmful microbes. There are a couple of potential downsides to canning as well. Aside from losing some of their flavor and nutrients over the years, additionally, canned preserves, jams, and jellies often use a lot of added sugar in their preservation process, which presents some health concerns. It's important to be aware that mold can grow on canned foods, especially on the surfaces of high-sugar foods like jams and jellies. Mold can produce toxic compounds called mycotoxins, which may be carcinogenic. Luckily, mold is often colorful and easy to see on canned food surfaces. You can prevent mold through proper heat processing and airtight sealing practices. It's a good idea to test the seals of your canning jars before putting them away for storage in the cupboard or garage. 2. Freezing. A great option for preserving most foods. You can freeze soups, baby purees, oats, and coffee grounds to veggie burger patties, chopped fruit, and blanched vegetables. A properly maintained freezer will store food for long periods, after which you can safely thaw, either in the fridge or by setting in cold water only, and cook it as desired. Nutritionally, foods that you prepare at home and then freeze are almost always better for you than frozen meals you'd find at the grocery store. Freezing comes with minimal risks, but there are a few things to keep in mind. Everything in the freezer is subject to freezer burn, which happens when air comes in contact with the surface of the food, and it can look like grayish-brown spots. This doesn't make the food unsafe to eat, but it does make it dry in certain areas. You can cut these areas off when you thaw the food. And while some foods taste very similar after freezing, others go through significant, and sometimes not altogether pleasant changes in texture. And as much as we'd like them to, frozen foods don't have an infinite shelf life. Foods such as soups and stews, vegetables, and fruits can spoil after a long enough time. To prevent storing foods in the back of your freezer and forgetting about them for 3 generations, hey, isn't this a piece of grandma and grandpa's wedding cake, and risking spoilage, which I'm guilty of? Write the date on the container in permanent marker and use or toss extremely old specimens on a regular basis. I'd recommend storing more recently frozen foods at the back and choosing to thaw and eat the older items first. This creates a natural rotation and cuts down on eventual food waste. 3. Drying or dehydration. An excellent preservation method for fruits, vegetables, and herbs. Drying food tends to increase its flavor, costs very little, and makes storage easier by reducing its size. Food storage and preservation. Dehydrating food. How does it work? Dehydration removes water from fresh food, which prevents bacterial growth. The moisture content of home-dried food should be around 20% or less. You can do this by using a commercial dehydrator, hanging bunches of fresh herbs to dry, unless you live in a high humidity area, oven drying foods, or even using the sun to make your own solar food dryer. Before you dry certain fruits and vegetables, you may want to blanch them. Dip them briefly in boiling water to help preserve them. However, dehydration does have some drawbacks. While many nutrients remain fairly stable during dehydration, vitamins A, C, and thiamine are sensitive to heat if produce is blanched or heated in the oven and air. Also, electric dehydrators use a lot of energy, which you can avoid by using some of the other home drying methods when possible. Dehydrating food can also take a while, often over 10 hours, so be sure you're prepared to be patient and do some planning ahead if you pursue this method. And preparing foods for drying can take time, too. For example, slicing and coring fruits and spreading them out on a drying rack, all of which may need to be done manually. 4. Fermentation. Fermenting foods is a great way to boost your intake of healthy probiotics, good bacteria, that are great for your digestive system and immunity. Fermenting starts with lactofermentation, which is a bacterial process that preserves and boosts nutrients in food. The basic steps include chopping, grating, or otherwise preparing your raw food, deciding on the culture you'll use, typically salt, whey, or a starter culture, preparing and adding brine, and placing everything in an airtight container in a cold environment. Fermentation does require some care, as food can go bad during this process if you're not using fresh veggies or don't use distilled or purified water. Fermenting also typically uses a lot of salt, as salt helps preserve food by drawing out its water content and preventing bacterial formation. This is a drawback for people. You may want to think of fresh sauerkraut, kimchi, and other salty fermented vegetables as the salt source for some meals. A note about mold. How do you tell if fermented foods have gone bad? Often, a film may develop on the surface, but this may not necessarily be mold. Sometimes it's actually a harmless yeast called calm yeast. Sometimes fuzzy spots on your food that are pink, black, green, or red are mold. This doesn't mean the whole batch is garbage though, as you can often remove the top layer and still safely consume what's underneath the brine, if it smells and tastes okay. However, I always say, when in doubt, throw it out. Or better yet, put it in the compost. Mold is actually fairly rare in fermented foods, and there are some ways to prevent it from developing. First, use the freshest produce you can, which in an ideal world would be organic from your own garden. Next, choose the appropriate cool temperature for fermentation, between 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Also, using the right amount of salt, around 1 to 3 tablespoons per quart of water, can help prevent mold. 5. Pickling. Similar to fermentation, pickling can be done on more than just cucumbers. Have you ever had pickled green beans? Yum! Some other commonly pickled foods include beets, cauliflower, peppers, cabbage, and even fruits like lemon or mango. Food storage and preservation. Pickling. Pickling preserves food in a high-acid solution, either via a process of natural fermentation or by adding vinegar and salt, and sometimes sugar. It prevents spoilage and extends shelf life. Many combinations of pickled foods also look pretty and make great gifts. Very few ingredients are needed for home pickling. Really all you need are the fruit or vegetable, a high-acid brine solution, water, vinegar, salt, and optional sugar, and an airtight container. 6. Cold storage. This is the most common way many of us store produce, whether in the refrigerator or in an underground root cellar if you're lucky enough to have one of those. Cold storage produce, like apples, pears, root vegetables, celery, and cabbage can last up to several months if stored correctly. It's important to make sure you're aware of and following ideal temperatures and conditions for food storage to get the best shelf life from them. Apples, for example, should ideally be stored at just above freezing, in a damp and breathable bag. Even though it's tempting to bring your fresh produce home and line it all up on the counter, it's best not to store things closely together as this can cause them to spoil. Many fruits and vegetables, like apples, cantaloupe, blueberries, bananas, potatoes, and tomatoes give off ethylene gas, which makes things around them ripen and brown faster. Different fruits and veggies need to be stored in particular ways to best preserve their freshness. Some produce like apricots, grapes, strawberries, green onions, and asparagus go in the fridge right away. Avocados, kiwi, peaches, and pears should ripen on the counter before you put them in the fridge. And never refrigerate pomegranates, mandarin oranges, ginger, and jicama, as they fare best at room temperature. Other things to keep in mind with cold storage. Maintaining the proper amount of moisture is also important to prevent drying out, wilting, or premature mold. Rather than storing produce right on the counter or shelf, it helps to store them in containers with holes to promote air circulation like baskets, mesh, or paper bags with holes punched in them. If your fridge has a fan, as most do, it can dry foods out. The produce drawer is typically protected from this effect. Foods stored loose in the fridge, outside of the produce drawer, will dry out if not kept in a bag, container, or otherwise protected from the fan's drying effect. Choosing good-looking produce at the store also helps prevent early spoilage. If you're not going to eat them immediately, don't buy avocados that are already mushy, or bananas that are already spotting. Check your produce to make sure it's not badly bruised, discolored, punctured, or otherwise damaged. It's also important to wait to wash produce until you're ready to preserve, cook, or eat it, as pre-washing it can actually lead to mold formation during storage. Lastly, if you're growing your own food, make sure you know when it's at its prime, so you don't harvest it too early or too late. Some other views and illustration. Is it okay to store leftovers in a container that once held whipped topping? Can you reheat foods in carry-out styrofoam containers? We know that milk should be refrigerated, but what about an open bottle of salad dressing? Follow these tips for choosing the correct containers and location when storing food at home. Container choices. First, choose the right container. Use only food-grade containers for storing food. Food-grade containers are those containers manufactured especially to hold food, like Ziploc bags or Tupperware containers. Do not use non-food grade containers like plastic or paper shopping bags or plastic trash bags to store food. Chemicals or dyes from these bags can leach into the food and contaminate it. Do not reuse food containers that are hard to clean or may contaminate stored items. Some food containers are hard to clean or have hard to clean lids. Plastic water bottles and yogurt containers are good examples. Even though these containers originally held food or water, they are hard to clean and should not be reused. Other single-use items that should not be reused are disposable plastic utensils, plates, and cups. Styrofoam trays or take-out containers, and plastic containers from cottage cheese, sour cream, chip dip, whipped topping, margarine, and milk. Use single-use wooden items only once. Some wooden food-related items, such as popsicle sticks and shish kebab skewers, are intended for one-time use. If you want to reuse shish kebab sticks, buy the metal ones. Rather than reuse popsicle sticks, purchase one of the containers for making popsicles that comes with reusable handles. Or use a new purchased popsicle stick every time. Take care when choosing containers for reheating. Numerous research studies have shown that using the wrong type of container when heating food in a microwave oven can transfer harmful chemicals into the food. Choose glass or microwave-safe plastic containers, or white paper plates for microwave heating. Do not reuse plastic food containers from margarine, cottage cheese, or similar foods for microwave heating. Do not use styrofoam or take-out containers in a microwave oven. Some ceramic pottery dishes are microwave safe. Check the bottom of bowls, cups, and plates for information on safe heating in these dishes. Correct location. Store perishable foods in the refrigerator or freezer. Meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy products, milk, cheese, yogurt, etc., are perishable foods that spoil easily. These foods, raw or cooked, should be stored in the refrigerator. But don't expect the refrigerator to prevent spoilage altogether. For longer periods of time, meat, poultry, fish, and most cheese can be wrapped in aluminum foil or placed in a freezer bag and stored in the freezer. Most fruits and vegetables will benefit from storage in the refrigerator. To help prevent foodborne illness, Always store cut or sliced melons, watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew in the refrigerator or on ice. A few fruits and vegetables, especially bananas, avocados, tomatoes, onions, and sweet potatoes, will soften and turn brown if stored in the refrigerator, so store these at room temperature until you are ready to cook with them. Once cut, peeled, or cooked, store all fruits and vegetables in the refrigerator. Store cooked or prepared foods in the refrigerator. If you open a can of peaches, or prepare macaroni and cheese using a box mix, always store the leftovers in the refrigerator. Any leftover canned stew, baked beans, pasta meals, and other similar items should always be refrigerated. Store opened bottles of dressings and sauces in the refrigerator, if recommended. Check the label on opened bottles of salad dressing, ketchup, and similar items. If the label says keep refrigerated, then follow package directions for both quality and safety. Avoid storing food too long. Some harmful bacteria can grow, even in the refrigerator. Periodically check dates on luncheon meats, hot dogs, and dairy products to make sure you are consuming these items before the use-by date. If you are not sure how to store an unopened package or bottle, consider how the item was stored at the market. If you purchased the food item from the refrigerator case, or if it was stored on ice, there is a good chance that the food should be refrigerated once you get it home. As you already know, perishable foods can be a bit tricky for storing. They spoil quickly and need to be stored properly in order to stay fresh and keep germs from multiplying. Eggs, dairy products, fruits, vegetables, meat, poultry, and seafood are the most typical perishable foods. The problem is that we tend to waste perishable foods a lot because they go bad before we eat them. And that is a waste we would all like to avoid. Let's find out how to store perishable foods so they stay safe to eat and minimize food waste. Store perishable food like pastry and eggs. Pastry and eggs should be held in the fridge. Get to know high-risk foods. Food poisoning bacteria could be very unpleasant and dangerous. It grows and multiplies on some types of food more easily than others. For this reason, perishable foods are forbidden in storage facilities. Furthermore, let's learn which are these foods, so we can pay special attention to storing them. Custard, cheesecake, and other dairy-based desserts and products. Both raw and cooked meat, including poultry such as chicken and turkey. This includes foods containing them, such as casseroles, curries, and lasagna, and small goods such as hams and salamis. Eggs and egg products can be very dangerous once they spoil. Pay attention to the meals and products with eggs such as mousse and other desserts. Seafood spoils easily as well, such as seafood salad, patties, fish balls, stews containing seafood and fish stock. Rice and pasta maybe seem like they are always safe to eat, be careful. Prepared salads like coleslaws, pasta salads, rice salads, and even fruit salads are high-risk foods. Food that comes in cans and jars are harder to spoil, true. But they can also become high-risk foods once opened, and should be handled and stored correctly. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever faced food storage challenges? What ways do you store or preserve your food? What ways do you store or preserve? Now that you've read this article, will you try a new way of food storage or food preservation?